Titans, you're up next on the exotic armor tier list, but we'll take a look at the two new exotics Titans got in Rise of Iron first. First up are Thagomizers. They give you an extra melee and they give you Amplify for free. Amplify makes it so that if you kill something with a melee attack, you get bonus super energy. This gives you the ability to pick up something like Overload instead, where you can have the chance to get an instantly recharged melee whenever you actually use your melee. The proc rate isn't anything insane, but it's not terrible either. With the glove slot being so competitive right now, I don't think these really have a place for anything serious. But they do work with some builds. I've seen fun builds with Monte Carlo and the Raid Fusion or something like that, with other bonuses that promote regaining energy whenever you do something, so that way you can just punch stuff non-stop and get supers like crazy, and that build and all those other builds are well and good. In heroic mode raids, I definitely want to keep things safer, and while I'm a very aggressive player, that's a very aggressive build that requires a little bit more finesse than what you're used to. Don't get me wrong, in heroic strikes and stuff like that, it's a very fun build. Even though Monte Carlo isn't the best weapon, it's a very fun build to play. But if I'm trying to get super serious with being a PvE hero, at least at this time, it's not a build I'm looking to utilize right now, especially when I'd have to give up my bonus heavy ammo, either in the form of the Raid Gloves or Rune Wings. Are Thagomizers usable with that build in everything? Sure, and I'll be messing around with that build soon to see how it can perform at the highest levels. I will say that if Monte Carlo ever gets any sort of a minor damage boost, you're going to see it in a lot of PvE builds. The main issue is that Thagomizers feel like they're locked to that sort of build, and if you're not using that build, they're just not very exciting. I understand something like Nothing Manacles is also locked to a very specific build, but when that specific build is one of the best builds that you can use, it's not as big of a deal. You need to play that very aggressive playstyle specifically, and that sort of playstyle is different from a Nothing Manacles Energy Drain build, which is not aggressive, but not passive either. Not to mention that if you're just looking for the utility of double melee for like a double melting point build for Axis or something, well, the Helm slot on Titans isn't too competitive right now, and Insurmountable Skullfort gives you double melee, and you don't need to give up your glove slot for the Raid Gloves. In PvP, yeah, Striker Titan Melee Punch is really good. It does really crazy high damage. I feel like on average, though, you're probably not punching people that often where you would need melee charges that frequently. If you are, then great, go nuts. But if you're not, then it's not as vital and you can stick with something like Armamentarium. The other exotic for Titans are the Dune Marchers, which give you a whole bunch of speed-related stuff. Increased sprint speed, movement speed while aiming, and tighter turn radius while sprinting. For PvE, unless you really like movement-based bonuses, these don't provide any sort of distinct power increase. It can provide a power increase, but it's not one that I'm going to be able to tell you is certain. It doesn't give you a specific power. Like Rune Wings or Armamentarium, I can tell you the power gains there because those bonuses are tangible. More ammo, more grenades. Movement abilities are more independent per player. For example, I don't use Shade Step because I'm terrible with it. So for me, something like Graviton Forfeit is terrible. But if you're good with Shade Step, then Forfeit could be amazing for you. These are no different. So for PvP, the more you're able to utilize the movement speed bonuses, the more these are going to be beneficial to you, much like Bones of Ao, much like Radiant Dance Machines. In this current meta of shotgun insanity and movement speed, I feel like these, along with Twilight Garrison, are a really good option to either close the gap or to run away from another shotgunner. Dune Marchers provide basically the same speed increase as Headstrong does in the Striker talent tree, so you're looking at about a 5% movement boost in both sprint and movement while aiming speed. I feel like if you're like me, who will just forget that they have Twilight Garrison on or are bad with its activation, that these are easily the next best thing. However, one thing to be aware of is the tight turn radius increase. I've come to like the increased movement speed while aiming benefits of other speed-related perks. So for example, if I have Second Wind activated on me, I really like that speed for aiming. But the turn radius on the boots will probably throw you off a little bit because it basically increases sensitivity while sprinting in a way, so just be wary of that. However, if you're not a very aggressive player, also like me, you're not going to need the speed as much, so something like Armamentarium might be a little bit better for you. As for all of the other exotics, you're again not having too much movement in any directions, but there are a couple of minor tweaks. In the helm slot, and man, there's a lot of helms, we'll start with Eternal Warrior, which stays on the low end. A 1 in PvE and a 1.5 in PvP. Unstoppable just isn't enough of a game-breaking perk to have at all times, and since you don't get the armor bonus that comes with it, the benefit of surviving a 1 headshot, 2 body shot situation against a hand cannon just isn't there. Imperium Bellicose is also on the low end due to its non-impactful bonus. It can throw people off, but typically only for so long. Helm of Inmost Light gets very similar treatment as well, with a 1 in PvE but a higher PvP rating because it provides slightly more useful bonuses. Helm of Saint-14 mainly gets the same rating as before, but I'll bump up its raid score compared to King's Fall. It is definitely more useful in Wrath of the Machine, on Vossic with all of the ads, and with Siege Engine's craziness, although for Axis it kind of falls back to where it was. Insurmountable Skullfort gets a slight boost in the raid as well, but stays on the low end for PvP. A double melting point build is pretty nice for Axis if you have a lot of Titans, but is not vital to success. It even works on Vossic, but is a bit harder to pull off and is once again not mandatory. The Glass House was previously a 2 in most activities and a 3 in group play. I don't think it should have been that high for group play in the past, so things will stay the same because I'm retroactively giving it a slight bump. The Glass House, while not crucial, is much more helpful in Wrath of the Machine than King's Fall with all of the movement, but outside of the raid remains a lower tier option. The Taikonaut stays as a low tier option for PvP and a mid for PvE. If it does indeed stack with the raid armor, then I'd say it's a somewhat viable option, but if it doesn't, and I don't imagine it will, and if it does, it might not do it too well, then it'll continue to stay known as the not as good as Rune Wings exotic. Moving to gloves, the ACD 0 feedback fence stay the same low score in PvE, but I'd be willing to hear a bump in PvP to higher than 2.5, but I don't think it really moves. The meta is currently very close range oriented, and the shockwave can kill people, but people typically use melees as finishers, not openers, and I don't care how strong Titan melee is, Hunter and Warlock can hit you from farther away. No backup plans continue to stay where they are, but again, I'm willing to bump these up in PvP due to the shotgun meta. The bonus is really awesome, but the problem is that you need to play Defender, which is just not as good as Striker Titan, for example. That being said, it is still very fun to play, and is definitely viable. Immolation Fists, I gave a 3.5 in PvP last time. I don't know what I was thinking there, because that is not deserved. Explosive Pyre in PvP can lead to some awesome moments, but it is in no way that crucial to the experience of playing a Sunbreaker. Finally, Rune Wings more or less stay where they are, but are no longer as important thanks to the raid gloves in Fallen-based activities. They're still good, but the fact that you can live without them now opens up your options to, well, a couple of things. The Armamentarium actually gets better in PvE and stays as an elite option for PvP. Since you don't need to wear Rune Wings if you have the raid gloves for Fallen activities, that means your exotic slot opens up, and Armamentarium is one of your better options. On Vossic, I still like the raid chest armor, but for everything else, Armamentarium is great. In PvP, it's still as good as ever. Crest of Alpha Lupi is the res exotic, good in trials, bad in other spots, yada yada. Twilight Garrison remains unranked in PvP due to it being a skill-based exotic, and in PvE, unless you're going for some speedrun style stuff, you don't really need to use it in PvE. It doesn't give any sort of power increase, but if you like the bonus enough to keep it, then there's nothing wrong with that. As for the boots, well, it's still not too pretty. Peregrine Greaves give you more damage on shoulder charge while in the air. Those are going to stay towards the bottom. With the nerf, shoulder charge is just not being used as much anymore, especially due to the meta, and even though it's hilarious to shoulder charge people mid-super, I don't think that opportunity is happening very often. The stand-asides get a slight PvP bump thanks to their buff, and because the bonus on them sort of undoes the nerf that shoulder charge received, but even with that buff, no one is really using shoulder charge right now because shotguns are everywhere and you're just gonna get blasted in the face. That's going to do it for the Titan Exotics. Hunters, you guys are coming up next. If you enjoyed this video, a positive rating would be appreciated. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.